Welcome back, everybody. I'm Brad Brown. That's Joe Lossett. We just wrapped up some Pioneer action here at our NRG champs. Moving into some Legacy now. I know Joe's a huge fan of Legacy. I like to watch it. Don't play it too much, but should be an interesting day here for our Legacy event. What kind of archetypes are we going to see?
So I think we're in a good show. We have a lot of variety here. Tops in the field, we have 3 Death and Taxes players and 3 somewhat varied blue-white based control decks. And then on the fringes, our players brought some stuff that you don't see very often. We have a Bomberman deck, which is a deck that we've seen a little bit here on the series. We have a green-white Depths based deck splashing blue. We have a blue-black Ninjas deck, and we have Enchantress. And all 4 of these decks collectively represent approximately 0% of the typical Legacy metagame.
Right.
So it should be a good show. We have some interesting stuff. I would have to say that out of the fringe decks, the Ninjas deck seems like probably the lowest powered deck that we have.
Sure.
However, if it gets rolling, it could really take over a game.
Right. Yeah, something to note here, too, our Enchantress player, which is Simon Camero, he played this deck at our champs in 2017, and he went undefeated in Legacy in that event. This is a deck he's very familiar with. He knows its fringe. He likes to kind of play on the outskirts of a metagame. And this is a deck I wouldn't expect a lot of players to really know about unless they've been following Simon on our tour for quite some time.
No, this might be a matchup where players are reading cards in the opponent's deck at the beginning of the match. And it's a long question that gets played out over time. Does experience your deck matter more than the power of the deck?
Sure.
And yeah, like you said, 2 years ago, he showed up and showed that, experience with the deck matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've got some other decks here I want to point out. So the first one is Burn. We do have a copy of Burn. Price of Progress seems like it's kind of at its worst to me. We see a lot of snow decks floating around. What do you think of that card?
Yeah, I think Arkham's Astrolabes printing means that decks are able to play fewer dual lands, and so we're seeing more basics, and so Price of Progress is just, I mean, if we're taking, say, mid-game where you have your 2-mana spell, instead of doing 6 damage, now it does 4, that adds up, and so that the card doesn't become unplayable, but it's worse.
Now, that same deck, though, we see some changes starting to occur. We've got 4 Exquisite Firecrafts in the main.
Yeah, that is going to work very well against all of our players with counterspells. It's just, you're going to blitz right through them, and 4 damage is no joke, and this is going to add up. And these burn decks we can see a pattern play out over time where, early creature damage, and then, you're tapped out, try and squeeze in a bolt. Maybe you chose not to force it, even if you have one.
Right.
And then Firecraft is going to finish you off, and there's not really a way of stopping it.
Right, and our deck list will be open, so it'll be interesting to see how players choose to play around Burn now. Maybe they'll choose to kind of force or counter those early burn spells that they normally wouldn't, knowing that these Exquisite Firecrafts have inevitability against them.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about Delver. Delver's a deck that has been very popular in the past, but we only see 2 copies of it in our metagame this weekend. What do you make of that?
So there's a couple. For one, I would say it is underrepresented in this field compared to what expectation would be, but there are a couple reasons pushing its metagame share down slightly. One being same reasoning as Price of Progress. Wasteland is just not quite as useful as it has been. There are more basic lands, and that's just a good counter to Wasteland. It's just to have a lot of basic lands in your deck. Another big development we've experienced recently is, Rogue Delver was the #1 deck in Legacy over a good chunk of this year, and then Wrenn and 6 was banned, and the Delver decks had adjusted and incorporated Wrenn and 6, and they were kind of reliant on it. And now that that's gone, the decks have to be rebuilt, readjusted, and the power level has just gone slightly down. And so we're seeing fewer of them.
Right, and you were talking about Wrenn and 6 being such an important ban. Now decks like Death and Taxes can kind of see a rise in the metagame, and we see 3 players showing up this weekend with Death and Taxes. This is a deck that I've always loved to play. I love the play patterns in this deck. Instant Speed, Flicker Wisp will always be one of my favorite things I can possibly do.
Sure.
And now with the Wrenn out of the format, it's given it a little bit of breathing room. And things like Palace Jailer, giving you the Monarch, generating a lot of advantage against these control decks. That's something that it can keep up with these Supreme Verdict decks now and the Terminuses of the world.
And something in our Death and Taxes players Whereas we would have seen over the summer maybe a mix of giver runes and mother runes, or just all givers to avoid having more creatures that get picked off by Ren 6.
Right.
We now have all the players full play sets of mother runes.
Yeah, it's definitely just a much better card. And like you said, it was just a kind of byproduct of the metagame at the time. So that's going to wrap up pretty much our metagame analysis for the archetypes for Legacy. So looking at our overall list here, what deck do you think you would have shown up with?
Well, choosing from the decks that our players brought,
right.
I think I would choose the Bant Miracles deck. Now, given the opportunity to change the deck, I would cut all of the miracles. But
Sure.
I would keep everything else in the deck.
Right.
I like the way it's put together. I like some of the sideboard options. I think if I was going to play a blue-white control deck, I would want to have these splashes available for Veil of Summer and Pyroblast. I just would... I'm more interested in maximizing the blue card count, so I would be interested in Supreme Verdict over Terminus.
Sure.
But control with pitch counters, with some defensive cards, and then packed in with Planeswalkers. That is what I would want to play right now.
Gotcha. Okay, so almost mid-rangey a little bit?
You could say that, although the mid-range component, instead of being creatures, traditionally
Right.
would be Planeswalkers. But
sure.
yes,
Right.
that it would be fair.
Okay, and we were kind of talking about this earlier. I would very much be on brand. If I can play Death and Taxes, if I think it's good in a metagame, I will certainly be playing that. And that would be my deck of choice for sure. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly, and we'll get started with that Legacy action.